The real working end of the 2012 prophecy, where we start to have the rubber meet the road, is looking at the solar system and seeing that all the planets are changing the same way as the Earth is changing. The Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are a universal phenomenon throughout the solar system. When we start to look behind the veil, the hidden reality that we have, and we start seeing a deeper truth of ourselves and a deeper truth of what it means to be human on this planet, we come into contact with a body of information that has been kept secret for thousands and thousands of years. And the reason why is that with this information comes the potential for what is called apotheosis. Apotheosis means human becomes God. The people who are in power believe themselves to be gods. They have inherited an ancient tradition which encourages the practice of developing your own spiritual and intuitive faculty to a much, much greater level than most people ever do. And they have a variety of practices, very distinct practices, which are engineered to awaken your psychic center. In my previous video, which most of you have seen, 2012 Enigma, I show you visual evidence of the pineal gland symbolism in the pine cone. And I show you that symbolism all over the world, in all different traditions, Babylonian traditions, even in the Vatican. The largest statue in the square, which is called the Court of the Pine Cone, it's huge. It dwarfs the size of a human being. Why would you put a pine cone on a big statue? Why did Jesus say in the Bible, "If thine eye be single, then thy body will be full of light"? If your eye is single, what does he mean by that? Does that mean that if somebody pokes your eye out that you're going to suddenly start glowing? No. Now, there is a whole religious conspiracy going on that says that Jesus never existed, that it was all a bunch of extrapolations based on various historical figures, then consolidated into what we now call the New Testament. And I would propose that it is impossible for such an outrageously enduring legend that so many people followed with such passion to have been concocted by some sort of mishmash of lesser spiritual figures who were all consolidated together. I do believe that these events happened. I do believe they've also been greatly misunderstood. When you see the greater reality that I am going to share with you in this presentation, you come to an understanding that your DNA did not randomly evolve on this planet. Your DNA is an energy pattern that exists throughout the entire cosmos. And that energy pattern is a wave. The ancients built the Great Pyramid as a focalizing device to harness that energy. I am proposing that the energy that makes your DNA takes natural materials that are all around, just molecules and atoms in space. It takes those atoms and molecules and it intelligently arranges them together to form the DNA molecule. Now, if that is true, then it means that everyone here in this room is created by an intelligent energy field. The center of the Milky Way galaxy is also a torsion field generator. Spherical torsion waves slowly expand away from the center, passing through stars and planets as they go along. As the solar system is impacted by these torsion fields, it charges up with energy, causing massive effects on the star and its planets, influencing them to become brighter, hotter, and more magnetic. These waves also have a stimulating and programming effect on the DNA molecule, ultimately rewriting the code of every life form on the planet. You now have just found the zone in which science and religion come together, in which you no longer have to take on arbitrary promises about there being a hereafter. Now you have proof that who you are and what makes you who you are came from something that is not physical, something that is vastly more intelligent and complex than we had ever imagined, and something that has been known about for quite a long time. There is no difference between biological life and inanimate matter except for the sophistication with which the energy that makes that matter is flowing. The rocks that make the pyramid are made of the same stuff that spirals in to make your DNA. It's just that the DNA is a much more intelligently spiraled version of that same energy, whereas the rock doesn't have as much structure. But the pyramid uses calcium carbonate, CaCO3. The basic matrix of limestone is quartz. And quartz is a crystal, so it has crystalline properties, which means as you get more and more crystallized in terms of a mineral, you're getting closer and closer to what becomes biological life than you had before. So a crystal is a very important conduit between the world of life as we know it and the world of the inanimate matter as we know it. That's an important point. Because what you have in the Great Pyramid is a device that harnesses this energy by a very simple process. You are going to see evidence in this presentation that demonstrates conclusively that the energy itself that makes physical matter has a fluid-like quality. It behaves as if it were a fluid. And with that fluid-like quality comes all of the basic behaviors that you get with fluids in movement, which would include a funnel. It's a very simple concept. If you have water that's pouring into a funnel, where's the fastest speed in the funnel going to be? Right at the bottom, right? That's where it's spinning the fastest. And the funnel is obviously going to take all that water and it's going to create a current through the funnel. So if every single calcium carbonate crystal inside the Great Pyramid is taking in this fluid-like energy and it's flowing through, now again, the flow is not happening in 3 dimensions of space. It's happening in 3 other dimensions, which is the time field. Okay, that's where things start to get complicated. If you want to find your higher dimensions, you look in time. Einstein assumed time was one-dimensional. It's not. Time is 3-dimensional. That means you can go forwards, backwards, and sideways in time. And that gives us a really wonderful benefit because that means we can see stuff that hasn't happened yet. We can see potential realities. One of the weirdest aspects of esoteric teaching is the concept that when you see a future event, you are seeing a probable future event. You are not seeing the future. There is a very important difference because anything that you think might be happening in the future doesn't need to happen if you don't want it to happen. There are all these movies coming out about 2012 and about extraterrestrial intelligence, and they're all saying doom and fear and disaster and cataclysm is going to come to the earth. If the universe is powerful enough to create the DNA molecule intelligently from a wave, if there is that much sophistication as you're going to see here, that life itself is divinely inspired, then why in the world would that same divine force that has intelligently brought us into being spontaneously decide to just have the sun belch off a big fireball and kill the whole planet? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that if there are ETs out there, that they would just be standing by and waiting for the planet to blow up, and that they're not going to do anything. So here's the riddle. If our DNA is intelligently structured by a wave, what does that say about the human body? Is this the only planet that a human body would form? Or is the human body a design? whose purpose is to express consciousness on a planet like the Earth. And if that were true, then what does that say about human beings that could be visiting us right now? I got news for you. I met Sergeant Clifford Stone in person. Sergeant Clifford Stone is a whistleblower who worked in significantly classified top-secret projects for our military and government. And his job, when he was called away from his normal duties in the military, was to visit sites where UFOs crashed. Now, 80% of the public believes that UFOs exist. It's no longer a myth, and it's no longer something that can be laughed at. It must be taken seriously, because anybody at this point who refuses to believe that UFOs exist is deluding themselves, because there is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence to suggest that they do. If even one photograph is not swamp gas, then we're not alone. Everything that you think you know about what ETs look like from movies is almost entirely a lie. There are no aliens. There are family members that look just like us. In fact, the farthest divergence you ever get from a human form is the typical gray physiology. The big head, the black eyes, the little nose, the little mouth, tapered jaw. Nothing like my face. I have no relationship to that face. Most people are still wrestling with the question of whether these saucers even exist. And then if they get to the point that they exist, the simplistic idea would be, well, maybe they come from Mars, or maybe they come from Andromeda Galaxy, or maybe they come from... There is no maybe they come from. That implies one place. What I'm saying is that we have a whole galaxy full of human life that naturally evolves on planets wherever possible. In fact, in the Law of One material that I so often discuss, it says there are 67 million planets with humans like us at this dimensional frequency just in this galaxy. 67 million. How in the world do you tell the public that we are surrounded by human civilizations, most of whom who have ever been able to get to us have technology vastly superior to what we have? Anti-gravity, no problem. Limitless free energy that is clean and doesn't burn anything and doesn't pollute the atmosphere, no problem. It exists everywhere. Our guys in the inside government have had this for at least 50 years. And there is a convergence of discoveries that came from men like Nikola Tesla and John Keely and Townsend Brown that then dovetailed with crashed wreckage from extraterrestrial spacecraft. So look, things are not going to stay the way they are very much longer. The year 2012, if nothing else, represents a bifurcation point, a split between the way that things have been and the way that things are going to be. And if you don't think that there are other humans out there who are willing and able to welcome us into their community, then you're not paying attention. Star Trek apparently was channeled to Gene Roddenberry through a group that he was working with that had started in the 1950s and is part of what we're going to be getting to at the end of this talk. The Star Trek information is very accurate to what actually is known, which is that they do follow a so-called prime directive, and they will not interfere with a given planet's history until that planet is ready. So last year, there was the big hoopla about October 14th, right? Everybody said a 5-mile-wide UFO is going to appear in the sky and it's going to hover there for 3 days. Well, first of all, a 5-mile-wide UFO would completely kill all the grass over the people who it was hovering from, not to mention it would be so terrifying and the average person wouldn't know anything about it. And if any ETs were to channel that through one person, then that person basically has become a messianic figure. And they don't ever want to give somebody that much leverage. Because what they found in the 1950s was that if they did speak through certain human individuals here on Earth, that their egos would get inflated because now they felt special, they felt different, they felt like they were the anointed teacher. And so we're not allowed to have any one leader. There is not going to be a second coming of Christ. However, the Casey readings, one of many sources we're going to be discussing, are adamant in saying that the second coming of Christ is you. It's all of us. It is the awakening of the Christ principle in humanity. And I'm not trying to force Christianity down your throat. In fact, I'm going to give you some very important information here. Every single ancient tradition in history has documented records of angels and gods. The angels look like human beings, but they glow, they can levitate, they can read your mind, they can teleport from one place to another, they can manifest objects out of thin air, they can create manna from heaven. They have abilities that we would consider to be godlike. And every culture has these human extraterrestrials in their heritage. All religions are the truth. All religions are the truth. All religions have everything you need to follow the way of God, if that's what you want to call it. It doesn't have to be, my God is the only God. My God is the only right God. All it means is that you have a particular culture in a particular place in a particular time, and that culture had an enlightened teacher who took the knowledge of the universe and brought it through in his own personal or her own personal way. Because in fact, in ancient Greece, the prophets were not men, they were women. Every woman who was a prophet was named Sibyl. And the most famous Sibyl was the Sibyl of Cumae, spelled C-U-M-A-E. And she had a prophecy that came true regarding the coming of Jesus.
In the Greek and in the Roman Empire, the women with the gift of prophecy were known as Sibyls, but none were as well known as the Sibyl of Cumae. She dwelled in a cave with multiple entrances and wrote her prophecies down on oak leaves. In the event that no one came to pick them up, they simply blew away.
The Sibylline prophecy is widely respected as one of the harbingers of Jesus' arrival, but that was one of many things. The prophecy book was so accurate that in the Roman government, that was considered the highest treasure they had. There was nothing in the Roman government that was taken on with greater seriousness than the Sibylline prophecy scripture. The Sibylline mystery texts are one of many texts that describe a utopian world that is coming into being. In fact, every ancient mystical and spiritual tradition speaks of a golden age that is coming. And they don't speak about it in a bland, sophomoric fashion. They speak about it in an exciting, invigorating, eye-opening way because of the extent to which they say things will be changed. And you're going to see those prophecies at the end of this talk. The true law is unity, that all is love, all is one, all is light. But the first distortion of that law, the first spin that you have to look at as soon as you grasp that the universe is love, is the free will principle. And what that means is that there's only one of us here, there's only one being, but the greatest gift that that being has given us is the opportunity to discover that we are one with it in our own way, without anybody telling us what to believe or what to do or how to think. It simply is. It's our path, and we can do anything we want. We have the free will. If we start infringing on someone else's free will, it is a design of the universe that whatever we measure out to others will be measured back to ourselves. That's karma. So yes, you can practice the negative path if you want to. You can infringe on other people's free will. You can manipulate them. You can lie to them. You can control them. You can steal their money. You can leave them unemployed and homeless and hungry. But you will be stolen from, lied to, manipulated, controlled, beaten, abused, raped. And you have to be. The Mayan calendar is the primary vessel through which we have speculation that the year 2012 might be different than other years. That's the primary vessel that we have. But what I'm about to show you to open up the talk is that the Great Pyramid of Egypt actually has a timeline in it, and that timeline has 2012 as the most important year. Obviously, here's the Great Pyramid. You can see that there are passages inside, and that these passages are much more complex than what's inside all the other pyramids. The outside of the pyramid has a hollowed-in surface, which is very interesting because it could potentially bounce lasers off of it from space. Originally, the pyramid was covered in white limestone casing stones, which were so smoothly polished that it looked like it was pure marble sculpture. Reflective marble with a perfectly flat face. This was not an object built by human beings on this planet with the technology that they had available at the time. Not at all.
When the Great Pyramid of Giza was first built, it was covered with white limestone that was so highly polished it would shine like a mirror in the daytime. Over thousands of years, the pyramid degraded. The casing stones were dislodged by earthquakes and were eventually hauled off to build mosques in Cairo. The pyramid we know today has a flat top, which makes it a six-sided object. In Egyptian numerology, 6 is the number of imperfection. When the capstone is returned, the pyramid becomes a 5-sided object, which symbolizes divine initiation and the transformation of the world into a golden age.
In this photograph, you can actually see that line of how precisely this thing was built, that it actually has that slight indentation going up the side. I want you to pay special attention to what are called the scored lines right here, because what we have is the fixation of a timeline. The timeline is fixed by an alignment where the pole star for its time, which was Alpha Draconis, shines down through the descending passage into the bottom at the same time that the Pleiades constellation is directly overhead. The scored lines are where that conjunction is marked, and this conjunction only occurs at 2141 BC. That's the only time that both of those things happen, where the pole star can shine down the tube and the Pleiades are directly overhead. So the message is you start counting at 2141 BC. I'm not going to take the time right now to try to explain to you how the pyramid's timeline works, because it's extremely complicated. But what I will say is that it's all based on numerology. The number 1 equals one thing, the number 2 equals something else. And here's the list of what the different numbers do. Now you can find this list inside Peter Lemaisurier's book, Great Pyramid Decoded. What you'll see is that there's enough information in the different numerals and what they mean that it is possible to encode very complex messages that basically can say anything you need them to say, just using mathematical measurements. Measurements that are very simple, measurements that can be repeatable. In the Great Pyramid texts, there are actual texts associated with the Great Pyramid. They give you all these numerical meanings. So they give you the code. You actually have the legend that tells you how to read the math. Here they're doing a variety of tests of the numbers because you want to multiply numbers together, subtract numbers from each other, etc. And if one number means one thing and another number means something else, and then you subtract, the act of subtraction means you're taking something away. So that the subtraction becomes part of the message. Addition means you're adding to, subtraction means you're taking away from, multiplication means you are multiplying the effect of. So mathematics becomes a language. This is a full diagram of the various passages in the Great Pyramid. And the one that we're particularly interested in is the King's Chamber, because what we will see is that the pyramid timeline counts 1 inch, which is an Egyptian inch, not a regular English inch, slightly smaller. 1 inch equals 1 year. Now, the guy who wrote the book, Peter Lemaisurrier, continues to use that system right up until the so-called Great Step. And he believes that the timeline should be changed when you get to this area of the timeline, because, he says, at that point, it just doesn't make any sense that events would be happening so fast in time. that so many things would happen that are so profound and amazing in such a short period of time? Why not? Why not? What kind of arbitrary decision has been made to strip the timeline of the possibility that things could happen so fast? This is important because the descending passage is the one we look at first. And you can see the dates of the timeline here, AD 1440, 1521. And Le Mesurier ties in these dates to some very interesting historical stuff. Obviously, summer of AD 1914 is the exact time that we went into World War I, that war to end all wars. At that exact moment, the passageway no longer has a smooth, flat floor. It goes into this area in which the entire floor is what the people that studied the pyramid called unfinished. Because it quite literally is this bumpy, convoluted floor that you can't really walk on without worrying about spraining your ankle. It's not flat anymore. It's all bumpy and weird and distorted. The time that that starts is 1914. And so what you have is, you're looking at a prophecy that was put in stone possibly over 10,000 years ago, if you believe scholars like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, who talk about the fact that the Sphinx is weathered with water that couldn't have been done unless it had been there for much longer than we take it credit for. The Great Pyramid, conventional dating is based on these quarry marks that they found in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. But those quarry marks were painted incorrectly. And they were painted incorrectly using all the mistakes that were in the book that the guy who discovered them had. Isn't that convenient? So, AD 2004 is when the bottom drops out of the world. That also is around the time of Hurricane Katrina. It's around the time that a lot more people started to suddenly wake up. 9/11, I think, is also included in this. I think 9/11 is the immediate precursor to what this pit is. And the pit also just represents the widespread understanding that there is great harm being done in the government and in the world. The Great Pyramid talks about 3 different paths that people take depending on where they're going. And this is worth looking at. The bottom path here, the subterranean passage, is materialism, the physical path of spiritual death for the masses of humanity. 2004, again, this book is from the 70s, shows that that's when we hit bottom. It's the ending of what happens in the beginning at 1914, which is the beginning of World War I, in which mechanized warfare allowed for much, much larger death than had ever been possible before. I mean, war was pretty crazy if you think about it before World War I, right? You got a bunch of guys standing there with guns, standing right in front of each other, bang, 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 and everybody's just falling down dead everywhere, right? But once you have an airplane, you can just cowardly go along and drop a big old bomb on somebody and blow the hell out of them. So what started in World War I came to a conclusion of how bad it can get with the Iraq War in 2004, and this regime that seized power over the most powerful country in the world. The people who built the pyramid, ostensibly 10,000 years ago, knew that George Bush was going to be coming into power. They might not have known who he was. It's funny, right? But it's true. They knew that the overall timeline specified that that's when things were going to hit their worst point. And I also receive intuitive information. I'm one of those people who can channel. Take that for what you will, but it's very interesting that I received prophecies about the Bush administration coming into power before they did, telling me that in the 2000 election debacle between Bush and Gore, that Gore did not have a chance. The exact passage was, the vice president considers this his own authorship, meaning he considers that he can author how this election is going to turn out, calling for vote recounts in Florida and so forth. It's very convenient when your brother happens to be the governor of Florida. Wonder how those recounts are going to go. The vice president considers this his own authorship while not realizing that he is completely naked. He's got no chance of winning the election. The interim period decides the next victor. The interim period is that time between when the election ended and when the Supreme Court elected George, or selected George W. Bush, right? So this is when things really hit the bottom, because that's when he stole an election the second time. But you have a middle path here. If you go up the timeline, you have the physical rebirth for semi-enlightened people, the karmic evolution towards spiritual initiation. So this is the secondary path. The biggest path, the top path, when you go up to the King's Chamber, you are now in the path of ascension. You're in the path of the Messianic initiative in which you become the fulfillment of the Christ promise and you achieve spiritual escape from materiality, from being human and physical. Now, one of the interesting things the pyramid did is it put these stones in the way, and there are actually other stones that were in this part that were taken out that were made out of limestone, but these are granite, and they're much more solid. And there was a hidden lintel there, which meant that you couldn't even see that these were there. It just looked like the passage only went down. And it wasn't until that lintel fell off while they were setting off explosives in the pyramid to blow the hole into this, that they heard something fall, and that's when they realized there was something else. And they bored a hole through and found this. Because actually this entrance is not in the center of the pyramid. It's 286.1 inches off from the center, and that has a symbolism of the reincarnation of the spiritual messianic role. This whole pyramid is basically designed to tell you that this messianic figure is coming back, which is us. We're all the messianic figure. So the granite plug shows us that we cannot go up this path. Everybody on earth is going to have to go through the path of the dead. And that's why the pyramid is a tomb, because it symbolizes that we are going through that death. So you have to go into the subterranean chamber. You have to hit the pit, or at least see that it's there and not fall into it. Before you turn around, this is in your own personal life, the metaphor is, and you have to start crawling back up the subterranean passage, and you get to this point where you can bore a hole through the wall, and then you have this very interesting passageway that's called the forced passage. And what that represents is that you literally have to bore your way through to get up to this point where you can either go into the Queen's Chamber, which is the path of organized religion, or the King's Chamber, which is the path of true spiritual mastery. So this represents how you dig yourself out of trouble. The well shaft or grotto is the stopover point where you actually get to relax a little bit. And many of us have had to go through that. Another interesting thing you see here is that the year 1945 is very interestingly flagged by this structure, which looks very much like there's some sort of altar associated with it. Now, this is what it looks like from the side. It's actually very stretched out inside the chamber. The chamber has a long length going towards the back wall here. It's actually not so tight as you see here. But 1945 is right in the middle of this little statue arrangement. That's the end of World War II. It's a nice little break. You see that there's two equal pillars here, sort of like World War I and World War II. And that's kind of what it means. So now you have this whole area down here, which means that part of the world, part of the people in the world will continue to go through this suffering as time goes on. They're not going to immediately see what's happening. Once you start going towards the Queen's Chamber, you have to climb your way through. This is the entrance to the Queen's Chamber right here. If you want to go up into the King's Chamber, you have to actually climb up these holes in the side, as you can see here. And this is the lifelike size of it. Now this is the Grand Gallery, as it's called. You're climbing up, and then this is the great step up here. And here's a diagram of them life-size going up. And the point that we're concerned with is right here. This represents, there's three little spots, as you can see from the side here, the grooves. But only one of them actually holds a piece of stone in it. And the stone has a symbol on it. And this symbol is the only symbol in the entire Great Pyramid that's like a little plaque that actually shows you something that means something. Okay? That's the only one. Other than this, which looks suspiciously similar to a pregnant woman's stomach. And that is not an accident. That's what it's meant to look like. It's meant to look like the earth giving birth. This is symbolic of the rainbow or the new sunrise. Guess what year in the timeline this is? 2012. The most important date encoded in symbol in the Great Pyramid, if you count 1 inch equals 1 year, is 2012. And it is encoded in this symbol, which represents the dawning of a new age, the sunrise, the rainbow, the fulfillment of the promise, because the rainbow is the bursting forth of color and light and love and majesty to the world that it had not been in before. The stone symbolizes trials that we have to go through, energetic walls that we have to pass through along the way. Now what I want to point out here here's where he actually talks about this and says, if you don't change the dating from 1 inch per year, the first Messianic Advent, where you just saw the symbol, is 2012. The second is the year 2030. The third is 2057, and the fourth is 2084. Now, what's 84 minus 12? 72. What does 72 mean? Who knows the answer? Bueller? Bueller? There are 72 years that it takes for the Earth to move through 1 degree of the precession of the equinoxes, which is a 25,920-year cycle that represents the end of the age. So it's interesting that if it takes 72 years to go through 1 degree, the pyramid is describing a 72-year transitional process in which not only is 2012 important, but once we get through 2012, the next date that we're going to look at is 2030. And then we're going to look at 2057. So we're only going to have to wait another, 18 years after 2012 before we get to 2030. That's pretty cool. 2012 is predicted as the year in which whatever the second coming of Christ is supposed to be will happen. Now, isn't it interesting that if you take the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan and you take the Great Pyramid, that the square footage, the actual perimeter of the pyramid is exactly the same. The Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico, the Great Pyramid in Egypt. You have the Atlantic Ocean separating these cultures, which most people would say are completely different. But they both build pyramids. And they both have a calendar. The Egyptian calendar happens to be a lot more complex to understand because it's this whole timeline thing in a big pyramid. But they both have a calendar that flags the year 2012. Now, do you honestly think that that means we can just blow this thing off and it doesn't mean anything? Now we have the proof that both cultures on both sides of the Atlantic say that 2012 is going to be something spectacular. The people who built the Great Pyramid intended to give us a message. And it takes a solving of a mystery to figure out what the message is. You don't just get the answer spoon-fed to you like a little baby. If that was all it was, then it wouldn't involve the free will principle I was talking about. The free will principle is what allows us to have something to strive for. The free will principle is what makes us have to search for the information. And that's why this is cool, because this is an investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. You guys are dipping into the investigation while it's still in progress. I might find something else later on that's going to be really cool, and then I'm going to have to change the whole presentation around and work that in, and I do that all the time. The interesting aspect of how I fit in, for those of you who haven't seen this before, is that there is a remarkable similarity between myself and the historical figure Edgar Cayce, who was a 20th century mystic and psychic, who could be given someone's name and address, and through nothing else but that information, he was able to give their medical problems and a treatment without knowing anything about them. All he knows is their name and address, and they sit down in their house, thousands of miles away, potentially. He sits down, he goes into a trance, he starts speaking, he doesn't remember anything that he says, and when he wakes up, the guy who wrote it down says, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing because, we found out that this person has leukemia, and you said they have leukemia in your reading," and this was done over 14,000 times. So what you see here is a comparison between Cayce's astrology on the inside and my astrology on the outside. And what you see here is Sun over Sun, Venus over Venus, Mars over Mars, Moon over Moon. There's all these correlations between the planets. Superficially, they're in the same sign. You can see that the probability just of hitting the same sign, Pisces, Taurus, Capricorn, year of the ox, the same year of the Chinese zodiac, 1 out of 12, and the moon in the same degree, 1 out of 360. The likelihood of all this happening by chance is really, really unusual, especially because the only time that you get this close of an alignment with Cayce's birth planets, it only happens once in 127 years after he dies, which happens to be the exact time that I was born. It's a coincidence. And of course, there wouldn't be any facial similarity. That would be too obvious. So we can't give you that. You guys have probably seen this before, most of you, but obviously there's a tremendous facial similarity. You can see an extraordinary likeness. In fact, many people have said it's like the same guy, just put on a hat. And in Zurich, somebody actually gave me a bowler hat, and I recreated the famous slack-jawed pose. So, okay, 2012. Now you know that the Great Pyramid is talking about it. Now you know that the Mayan calendar is talking about it. You also may know that the zodiac has ages. The age of Aquarius, right? When does the age of Aquarius come in? 2012. And that's been calculated based on constellations in the sky by mainstream astronomers. So now you have a third correlation. Ages of the zodiac, the Great Pyramid timeline, and the end of the Mayan calendar all say the age of Aquarius, the shift of the ages, 2012, buckle your seatbelt. Something's going to happen. Something very cool and wonderful is going to happen. If you're scared, it's because you haven't solved the mystery. You don't even know that it's a mystery. The fear is what gets you looking for something that will make you not scared. Is this another ordinary time in history? Is there any scientific credibility to the idea that this is not just another year, but that there's something going on? Well, first of all, we're learning more and more about the idea that we are not alone in the universe. The most recent disclosures from mainstream media, this is February of this year, said that there could be 100 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone. Scientists are changing their tune. They're not talking the way they used to talk anymore. Remember in the old days where they're like, and I say old days, I mean only, what, 5 years ago? Well, we don't know if any other star has a planet around it. Maybe they got big gas giants like Jupiter, but we don't really know. Well, now we've had so many advances in looking at the planets with telescopes and such that we know that there are planets everywhere, that most stars do have planets. And now they're calculating that there could be 100 billion planets like the Earth. So that becomes a lot easier to conceptualize the idea that there's extraterrestrial life. The galaxy may be full of Earths and alien life. That's CNN.com. Here's another 100 billion Earth-like planets in the galaxy alone. Here's another recent discovery that's very interesting. All blue-eyed people can be traced back to one ancestor who lived 10,000 years ago near the Black Sea. Guess what, guys? The white skin, the white people, if you will, are the most recent extraterrestrial DNA to come to the planet. Not the only, because hardly anybody on this planet is indigenous human, according to the traditions that we've encountered. But the most recent ET influx is white-skinned people. Everybody with blue eyes can be traced back to one single ancestor. Now, the Casey reading said that Edgar, in his past life in Atlantis, was known as Ra-Ta, that he was the guy who helped design and build the Great Pyramid with the cooperation of an extraterrestrial group called Ra, and that the reason why he was able to do all these magical things like channeling and being able to find out where to build the pyramid and being able to hear the words was that he was a hybrid. His mother was impregnated by a human extraterrestrial that had white skin. They'd never seen white-skinned people on Earth before. So, Edgar Casey's past life as Ra-Ta, it says in the readings, very controversial, was the first white man on Earth. And if that was my past life, then that means I'm your daddy. I'm your daddy. Thank you very much. You have to be able to laugh at yourself. I mean, it's ludicrous for me to say that I was somebody else, and I don't. All I know is that there's a facial similarity. You can't deny that, okay? You can't deny that. You can't deny that there's an astrological similarity. Those are facts. You can't deny that I also have done readings like he did, and you can't deny that I put readings online that predicted events that happened in the future that actually came true. Okay? And the Casey readings did predict that he would come back, and they said that he would be more like Ra-Ta than he was like Edgar. And Ra-Ta created a hall of records in which all the knowledge of Atlantis was put together for future races to use, for future people on Earth to use. The hall of records is accessed telepathically. And so what I've been doing is basically downloading the information from the hall of records that I knew back then and putting it together, and that's why we have information that's unlike anything else that you've seen, because it's all remembering. So the most powerful people in the world took the teachings that Edgar's past life as Rata helped to create and contorted it into a negative purpose. And so not only am I the daddy of all the white people, I'm also the father of the Illuminati. Yeah, that's really nice. Thanks for that, karma. The Illuminati have a tradition about a great prophet who they said was killed for his beliefs, and that he's the founder of all their spiritual teaching, and that legend that they teach in the very high levels of the Illuminati is identical to the Rata story. Okay? And they apparently inherited a prophecy that said that he was going to come back and help usher in the Golden Age, which they call the New World Order. Novus Ordo Seclorum, it's on the bottom. And that what they did is they inherited a positive prophecy about one of what the Casey reading said would be a team of liberators who would help change the planet. A team, not one person. All this stuff about one guy coming in and doing all this stuff is not true. The Great Pyramid speaks of Jesus coming in and speaks of him in very positive terms, but it also says this is a universal event for humanity's entire history. So it's not just about one religion, it's about something that benefits everyone. This time that we're in is a time of change, and it's a time in which we all get to experience that change together. We're all in this together, and each one of you are one of those liberators. If you're watching this video on the internet, or if you're in this room with me right now actually seeing this live, you are one of those people who has been charged with a responsibility to share what you know with the people. And yes, just like has happened to me, somebody is going to call you the Antichrist. It happened to you, apparently. Somebody is going to call you a Messiah. And that's not true either, because we're all here together to work on this stuff. There is no one savior figure per se. Can I get an amen on that? All right. Look, the purpose is for us to come together and to find commonality between us. So, the real working end of the 2012 prophecy, where we start to have the rubber meet the road, is looking at the solar system and seeing that all the planets are changing the same way as the Earth is changing. The Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. They are a universal phenomenon throughout the solar system. That's called interplanetary climate change. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about. You're also going to see evidence very clear in the fossil record showing that in even intervals of 26 million years, every form of life on Earth spontaneously changes and upgrades from one type of creature to another. The DNA code itself gets rewritten, and I'm going to show you the evidence of how that happens. More recently, another cycle was discovered that's 62 million years in length. This cycle was discovered by Dr. Robert Rode, goes all the way back to the first single-celled organisms in the fossil record, 542 million years ago. 62 million year cycle. Now, what does this mean? What I believe this means is that the center of the galaxy is releasing waves of energy. And the way that you visualize this is think about dropping a rock into a stream or a still pond. You drop that rock into the pond, the surface makes a ripple. It's a circle, and it goes out. These are ripples of energy that slowly travel from the center of the galaxy, and they're structured like layers of an onion. And they're evenly spaced because it's all vibration. It's all harmonics. So as these evenly spaced walls shoot through the solar system, they reprogram the DNA on Earth. And all of the creatures on Earth are spontaneously transformed, as you see in the fossil record here. There's no evidence in many of these cases of cataclysms. There's just suddenly one species and then another one. And there's no transition. You have shellfish, like a clam, and then the skeleton's on the outside and the body's on the inside, and then what happens? That flesh is on the outside, skeleton's on the inside. There's no halfway creature where the flesh is halfway in and halfway out. You go from shellfish to bony fish, bang, just like that. It was spontaneously changed. And there are many, many of these dropped things in the fossil record where you can't see the difference. So, in order to understand 2012 and to make sense of these prophecies, what we really need to do is look back to the past, as we've already started, and get a sense of what was the technology of Atlantis, because I want to present to you the possibility that a technology doesn't necessarily involve machines with electrical circuits and gears and moving parts. A pyramid can be a technology. It can be a technology that operates as a machine just by sitting there, and as I said earlier, acting as a funnel for this fluid-like energy that makes all of matter as we know it. Obviously, you have the pyramid here. This is the second pyramid next to the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx in front. These are the casing stones, what's left of them on the top, which originally, as I said, were mirror-polished, white limestone. We now have an Atlantis-type city that was found under the ocean on the western tip of Cuba. And this was covered in the media briefly, but then the story was squelched. This is the actual side-scan sonar photographs of what was originally discovered. This was two scientists, Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinzweig, who had been given a charter by the Cuban government to conduct side-scan sonar readings of the seafloor around Cuba, hoping to find sunken Spanish galleons with gold on them and treasure. And they promised that they would give the Cuban government a share of the profit. So that seems like a pretty good deal. You just give somebody permission to do these readings, and then lo and behold, if they find something, you get to make money. Now, the problem was that what they found was not treasure. It was much more valuable than just gold coins. It was actually pyramids and sphinxes and roads and buildings. Now, a three-dimensional reconstruction of what you see from the top down here has been built. So what you see here is the ruined platforms of giant buildings that are now half a mile under the ocean. And we know, based on geology, that these structures could not have been above sea level any time earlier than 10,000 years ago. They're at least 10,000 years old, minimum. We know this is true. This should be the smoking gun of Atlantis. There was a contract made with National Geographic. This was all supposed to be released in the summer of 2003, but it got squelched. It never came out in the open, unfortunately. Here's Paulina Zalitsky in front of inscriptions that she found in the caves in Cuba that are very, very similar to what she saw in the Atlantean ruins that she was looking at with a submersible submarine that has a little camera in it. She actually saw inscriptions just like this. Now, these are the descriptions of those energy fields in the solar system. Remember I was telling you the galaxy gives off these rippling waves of energy and they come through the solar system? Well, the Atlanteans knew about that and they were drawing it. And so what you see is planets here with their ripples on it, and then that's the sun. Or that could be the galaxy. We're not really sure. She also found these inscriptions in the caves of Cuba, which would have just been the highland mountains of Atlantis. And these are identical to inscriptions that were found on the stones underneath the water. Now, this is the closest that she's ever come to actually showing us one of the pyramids. This is from actual footage that was taken from her submarine. The only picture that has ever been released to the public showing one of her pyramids. You can look at it up close and get a glimpse of what actually is a blunted top. It does not go in a straight line. Well, there is another example of that, and that's the bent pyramid of Dashur in Egypt. And so what we're seeing is very, very similar structure. Now, this is an enormous, enormous pyramid under the ocean in Cuba. So, anybody that tells you that Atlantis is full of crap, I just gave you photographic proof that it exists. So that argument has been shot. We know for a fact that pyramid could not have been above sea level could not have been above sea level unless it was at least 10,000 years old. At least. Given that information, what the heck did they know, and why did they build these things everywhere they possibly could? Ancient sites do harness energy. We're going to see a variety of sites that do this. The first one we're going to talk about is menhirs, or standing stones. Now, I want you to just primarily look at them. There's not a whole lot to say except how beautiful they are. A person is only about this tall, so this gives you a sense of how huge some of these are. These stones are able to harness energy coming up out of the earth and ripple it out into the surrounding countryside in expanding circles. And that energy, as we're going to see, actually has positive benefits for people's health, has positive benefits for vitality. There's many, many things that these stones will do for you. And they harness an energy of consciousness, an energy that will actually help us to become more evolved, more intelligent, and more psychic. And it's just a phenomenal feat that they would actually be able to take these giant stones and get them to stand up like this in the first place. With the equipment that was supposedly available to them at the time, this is quite a stunning accomplishment. Dolmens are the next thing we're going to look at, and dolmens are actual cellars where you have stones built into a room. The purpose of these, and they are all over the place, they're in France, they're in Scotland, they're in Ireland, they're in England, is that you go inside and you meditate. And what it does is it captures energy from the earth and it concentrates it and focalizes it inside under this area here. And so you're sitting in there meditating and you get this big energy blast. And so look at that. Now how in the world, I mean the weight of this stone is so tremendous and it has stayed there for all these thousands of years. It never fell over, regardless of earthquakes or whatever happened. It's still there. And you can see another dolmen right over here. I mean, that's a side view of it, and here it is from the front. It's astonishing that they don't fall over, but yet they don't. Some of them are a lot more organized, where they actually have breathing holes, and then it's all kind of built in on itself. So this is a big cosmic energy chamber. You really get a big blast going in underneath one of these and meditating. The next one we're going to talk about is barrows. Barrows are mounds, and they exist in America as well as in England. The ones that I'm showing you now are all going to be in England. It doesn't look like much except just a big round dome. But the interesting part is, and you can see how pyramidal that one is, the interesting thing is that many of them have entrances, and you can actually go through the entrance and go inside, and there's a big round room inside. And you meditate inside the room, and once again you get this big spiritual energy blast when you go in there. Now they're not only single mounds, sometimes they become elongated mounds, and this is all related to tailoring the energy coming out of the earth. Henges are the ones that everybody is so familiar with and we love so dearly because of Stonehenge, but that's not the only one. This is a part of Avebury here, which is another henge. The sheep really like the energy the stones give off. Sometimes you get large stones that are just set up right but are not specifically tall and narrow like that. This is an example of a barrow and a henge. You have a henge in the front, and this is a barrow in the back with an entrance up here. Another example of a henge, another example. So you can see these don't just occur a couple times. They keep happening over and over again, and these are only the ones that are still standing. There's many others that have been buried. Now this is fascinating because this is the full outline of Avebury. Every single little dot in this entire serpent shape that you see here used to be a standing stone, and every single one of them still exists. They've dug them up from the ground. This was an enormous serpent with a head and then the stomach that has eaten something. And this is Silbury Hill. So what you actually have here, if you notice the triangular relationship between these areas, is all these stones and the mound are all built to focus energy here and here primarily. It sends the energy into this area where a large gathering of people happen, and it acts as a consciousness-enhancing technology, which we now have lost access to in the West. And this, of course, is Stonehenge, the most famous group of these standing stones of all. Quite beautiful, tongue and groove lintels that stand on top of the menhirs. This is what it looked like when it was first built, and you can see that every single one of those stones was there, and they've just fallen apart over time. And then over time, these post holes were dug that allowed them to calculate eclipses and planetary cycles and all sorts of things. Now the next question is, are these ancient structures connected? And the science that will help us to understand this is ley lines. Sir Alfred Watkins was the modern pioneer to discover how ancient sites all come together on uniform blueprints. In 1920s, he found that ancient holy sites could line up in straight lines. He called them leys. The sites from extremely different ages, millennia apart, were all aligned together, including Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and the Christian era. So here he is with his camera, and he would actually take pictures of long distances and calculate how straight the lines were, and they were amazingly accurate. Now look at this. What you see in this diagram is a part of England, and every single one of these little, where you see a word, that's an ancient sacred site. It could be anything from cathedrals to Stonehenge to all sorts of stuff built in all these different eras of time, but somehow every single one of them lands directly on that line. Now, why do you think they would do that? Doesn't it seem to suggest that they knew something? That there was some energy coming out of the earth that means that if you build a pyramid or one of these standing stones, that it's going to be a lot more powerful if you build it on that line than somewhere else. It's basically like this. If you want to eat food for dinner, you're not going to eat air, right? You're going to actually have a real meal. This is where the food is for the pyramid. So if you want your object to work, if you want your structure to work, you build it where the energy is, so it can harness the energy that you built it to make for you. The BBC published a very interesting article that gives us insights into the science of ley lines. The area again is Gloucestershire, and here's the line that we just saw before, and then you can also see there's another line there, which also has many, many ancient sites on it. Ley lines are one of the most enduring Earth mysteries, a network of prehistoric pathways crisscrossing country believed to have mystical significance. Their alignments and patterns of powerful Earth energy, said to connect various sacred sites including churches, temples, stone circles, megaliths, holy wells, burial sites, and other locations of spiritual or magical importance. Major prehistoric structures of higher importance can frequently be found to occupy locations where two or more leys intersect with each other. Alleged ley lines are often identified by spiritualists dowsing with rods. These methods are questionable in their accuracy, so the alleged placement of ley lines should be treated with some skepticism. Well, thankfully, that might have been true if all you had was dowsing, but what we actually have is a worldwide map of all the ley lines and why they're there, because it's all based on geometry. We're going to get to that right now. Hyperdimensional grid effects. The first place that we go to understand how all these ley lines connect together around the world is we got to find where all the weirdest stuff happens on the planet. Ivan Sanderson did that by investigating a massive number of disappearances of ships, which is marine, and aircraft. These ships are marine vessels that are sailing through the ocean, and all of a sudden they're gone. And there could be somebody sailing behind them and they seem to vanish. They don't know where they went. There's no flotsam, there's no wreckage, there's nothing to show that these ships were there. They just disappear. Now sometimes wreckage has been found and the phenomenon has been attempted to be debunked by people finding certain examples of wreckage, but that does not mean that all of this stuff is disproven by any stretch. Sanderson discovered that all of these different disappearances of aircraft and boats all occur at 12 locations around the world. They can all cluster around those 12 locations. And even more interestingly, the 12 locations are equally distant from each other. I mean, if you're just zoning out and kind of getting hypnotized by me and not really paying attention, you're not going to get the importance of that. Not that I'm hypnotic at all. But equally distant from each other, what does that mean? That's like a guitar string. When you pluck a guitar string, all of the points in which the string is vibrating like this, in between 2 points, it doesn't really move, and that's called a node. The nodes are always equally distant. That's a product of vibration. So if you have a string vibrating and it creates 5 nodes, those nodes stay the same, and the string is going up and down around the node like this. So what we're seeing is that the Earth's energy has these 12 spots where it's pulsating in and out like this, but on those 12 spots it's not moving. And what you're seeing is a gateway between dimensions that forms at those spots, which are geometric in nature. If you connect the dots, it forms a geometry called an icosahedron, which is one of the basic so-called Platonic solids because it was invented by Plato. who also gives us the dubious distinction of inventing school. So if you want to blame somebody for why you had to go through all those years of school, you can blame Plato. One of the 12 spots is the Bermuda Triangle, as you see here. Here they are laid out along the Earth. You can see this is the Devil's Triangle here in Japan. This is Easter Island down here. You have another one off Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. You have another one down here around Africa. That's the groovy stuff that's happened with the Himalayas. All the stories of the masters of the Far East, the masters and teachings of the Far East, Baird Spalding. He's got all that stuff about ascended masters. You have weird stuff that's happening with sightings in Africa, dinosaur sightings here. This is another disappearance spot. Most of the rest of them, as you can see, are in the ocean. The only two that are on land are in Africa and here in the Himalayas. You had a question? Yes, actually that's true. The Great Garbage Patch is right over here because this is an area in which all the ocean currents circulate called the doldrums. Because you don't want to sail through that, there's no wind there. But the reason why the garbage patch is formed there is because the water always circulates around these vortexes. These vortexes have a lot of energy around them. There's also the most number of electrical fish in the ocean in these areas, which is another interesting thing, like electric eels. Now, if you actually look at the whole Earth together, you get the icosahedron. That's the shape. That's how they all connect together. So this is a geometry. Now, the reason why this is important is that this geometry will form naturally if you vibrate liquid with a pure sound frequency. That's the big secret. A pure sound frequency, like one of the white keys on the piano, you play that frequency into the water, whatever the water is. In this case, it's the energy that behaves like water, but it's the same principle. But you can do it with regular water, and you get that geometry showing up in the water when you play these sound frequencies. So that's the basis of it. It's basically just geometry. It's a vibration. Geometry is vibration as a crystal. So these three Russian scientists, and everybody laughs when I say their names for whatever reason, Goncharov, Morozov, and Makarov. I don't know why that's funny, but okay, if y'all want to laugh, you can laugh. Found that over 4,000 sites fit on the global grid. And the global grid that they found, they started with Ivan Sanderson's basic 12 points, the icosahedron, and then they simply added in another geometry called a dodecahedron. And by mixing the two together, they found all the ley lines. They found a way in which everything that has ever been built that looks like it's built to harness this energy, including Chinese temples, pagodas, Stonehenge, dolmens, menhirs, all the stuff I was showing you, cathedrals, all around the world, Easter Island, the mound builders in America, you name it. They found 4,000 of these kinds of sites, and every single one of them was on this grid. So the whole world knew how to use this technology back then, and it's been lost. This is the most advanced version of the grid that we now have, called Becker-Hagen's, and this is where the black spots of the original 12 nodes of Ivan Sanderson's grid, and then you see how it's evolved. You now have two icosahedras together, one that is out of phase with the other, and that's what creates these 120 different triangles that form the grid. It's called the Unified Vector Geometry 120 Polyhedron, or UVG 120. That's the long name for it, but the simple name is Becker-Hagen's grid, which is a lot easier to say. Yeah?
Are there any here in the United States?
Oh yeah, if you look at the United States on the Becker-Hagen's grid, what's the first big node that you see? Right around Los Angeles, in Baja California there. So this is why there's so many people in Los Angeles, why it's such a huge population center, because we like to be near these nodes. They feel good, and they create a lot of energy. I'm very energized by living in LA. We're in this area right now. We're on this node right now where this talk is happening. The other big one, of course, is right off Florida. And look at this. The lines, again, are very important, and that line shoots straight up the east coast of the United States. So everybody on the East Coast, the whole East Coast megalopolis is all feeding off of that line. And then when people get old and they get sick, what do? They want to move to Florida. Why do they want to move to Florida? Because they feel healthier. Why do they get healthier? Because they're on the node. And the node feeds your DNA. There's Hawaii, okay? And what we know is that Hawaii is right on one of the nodes, and the cancer rates in Hawaii are dramatically lower than anywhere else in the world. Dramatically lower. We also find out that in Washington, D.C., the cancer rates are much lower. So the people that decided where to put the capital of the United States made darn sure that they used this grid, because what you have is a lot of these politicians, and they leave, like I think Richard Hoagland talks about Sam Donaldson as one example, that he left Washington, D.C. and died very soon afterwards. Because in D.C. they have a grid node that gives you a lot of energy that helps you heal. Now what you can also see here is grid effects in which the landmass is being sculpted by these geometric forces. These lines are not arbitrary. You can see these island chains that fit perfectly in a grand circle. You connect these nodes on the grid together. You see how they all fit together. Now the Germans discovered that there were some houses where the energy was really bad and people were getting sick and dying. 1920s in Germany with the dowsers discovered that more people got cancer in these certain houses, and they revealed from their dowsing, which I believe is credible, that the houses had veins of water running underneath them. The neighboring houses did not have two rivers that crossed together under the house. So it's when these two rivers of water crossed together that you were getting these negative effects that actually diminished your health. And apparently the reason why is that when you have two rivers crossing over each other underground, that they draw energy, that it creates an energetic friction that scrambles the field and actually scrambles your field and creates cancer. So it's not always healthy. Sometimes it can be unhealthy. So can we prove the sites harnessed usable energy? Well, obviously somebody thought so, because every single daggone site that you can find out of 4,000 in the world, all were built on this grid. If the grid doesn't mean anything, then why did they do that? Obviously there's a reason. The grid can be shown to have shaped the continents for where they are now, and clearly there was a usable energy that they were harnessing in order to bother to build the pyramid in the first place. I mean, it's not exactly an easy thing to build these pyramids. These stones are weighing hundreds of tons. Some of them are bigger than 18-wheelers. They're much bigger than 18-wheelers. They're the size of small buildings, a single stone. We can't even lift them now. We don't have any crane in the world that's big enough to lift these stones. Why did they bother to do it? And if they're doing it, why would they do it on this specific spot on a grid? What's the point? The point is that they're using energy. Well, if they're using energy, then how can we prove that? I'm not just going to ask you to take my word for it. I want scientific proof that shows me what they're doing and how we can use that technology today to help the world. Is that not a good idea? That's a great idea. Because if we can use this technology today, then we might be able to solve some problems that we have on the earth, including the energy crisis. And we may be able to find new ways to keep people healthy. Because, as you can see, the Krebs houses in Germany would actually make people very unhealthy, and other sites were very much associated with health. That's why they built the dolmens and the menhirs and the barrows. These were meditation spots. So in Russia, they now have done research with pyramids that holds the key to explaining all this stuff in a way that we can make sense out of. What you're seeing here on the bottom is people, and this is a 144-foot tall pyramid built out of fiberglass and PVC pipe. PVC pipe on the inside, as you can see here, and then these are the sheets of fiberglass on an angle going up the inside. An amazing, amazing structure that has many, many interesting things that happen once you've built it, both inside and outside. This is not simply something that you get to look at and say, wow, it's a pyramid, it's cool. This is a working technology that they have studied scientifically. And by the way, this is not woo-woo science. These are the same people that were in the military-industrial complex of the Soviet Union who, after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1990-91 time frame, still had the facilities, still had the communist government paying them a monthly salary, but didn't have anything to do because the military-industrial complex no longer existed as it once did. So they still have the labs, they still have a salary, and they can study whatever the heck they want. So because they had this whole background of research, they built pyramids. And they studied the science of pyramids, and they came up with some amazing research. So here are some smaller examples. You can see they were built in the countryside. This one obviously is a lot shorter. Now let's take a look at some of the things that they found. If you build one of these pyramids over an oil well, you get 25% more productivity out of the oil well. It's amazing. You get 25% fewer contaminants in the oil. They found incredible healing results. First of all, if you take a poisonous substance and you store it inside the pyramid, the chemical makeup of the substance changes and it's no longer toxic to the body. The pyramid is harnessing the very energy of life, the energy that keeps things alive and keeps things healthy. They even found that cancer, you could give the same carcinogens to lab rats and then to rats in the pyramid, and the rats in the pyramid would get much, much fewer tumors, if any, than the rats in the lab. You give them exactly the same carcinogen, and the rats in the pyramid do fine. The same thing was true with typhoid fever, diabetes, all this kinds of stuff. In the pyramid, there was no problem. There was a 400% increase in the productivity of seeds that were stored in the pyramid. That's another amazing effect. All you got to do is take seeds and scatter them into the pyramid, and then leave them there for a while, and then start planting them. And the plants are 400% bigger than the same seeds that were not put in the pyramid, over and over again. So it's like the seed itself and the plant that grows from it has been supercharged by this energy in a very fascinating way. There was strong electrical activity generated at the top of the pyramid, meaning that you could actually put a battery pile, like a battery charger up there, which is just positive, negative in a big solution, and it starts generating electrical current, and you can power your house with it. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because what they also found was that earthquakes did not happen anymore as these big, nasty, catastrophic events. They only got small little quakes that didn't cause any trouble to the land. Now, if the ancients are building pyramids all over the world, and we know that Atlantis sank, then do you think that maybe they were trying to make sure that that didn't happen again? Or, an even more interesting idea is, what if the ancients knew that Atlantis was going to sink, and they were in a mad dash to try to stop it from happening by building pyramids around the world, and they didn't get the network finished in time? That's another possibility. We don't really know which one it is. There was also an enormous column of energy detectable around the pyramid in the atmosphere, hundreds of miles wide. And this column of energy would actually deflect severe weather. You would have a storm coming in, and there's this big circle that forms around the pyramid, this energetic circle. The storm just goes right around the circle. It's incredible. So, what does this start telling us about the nature of weather? Think about that for a minute. What is weather? What is a severe weather activity? It's a torsion field, right? It's a consciousness thing. Earthquakes. Earthquakes, to some degree, are related to this torsion field, because if you have this pyramid which is regularizing that flow of energy, then you no longer get earthquakes anymore. The ancient teachings tell us that the earth is alive, and that bad weather and bad problems are the result of the earth being upset with us. That we create a disharmony, and the disharmony that we create is what creates the bad weather and the bad earthquakes and the volcanoes and all that stuff. And the pyramids were able to make all this stuff happen. The Russians took granite that looked like salt and pepper. It was white and black granite, and they put the granite inside the pyramid. And then after a while, they took the granite out and they built jail cells with it. What they found was that the prisoners who stayed in the jail cells made out of this specific granite were much more well-behaved than the other prisoners. The prisons that were built, where the cells were built with this granite, those prisoners in those prisons they all got off of alcohol and drugs. They all started to get along with each other much more than the others. And the problem is that the translation was bad, and we thought that it was actually salt and pepper that they were feeding the prisoners. It turns out that salt and pepper is actually granite. So that's a mistake. So this proves that there is a connection between the consciousness of humanity and the consciousness of the earth. Earth changes are not something that's happening randomly. We're also Oh my God, global warming, what are we going to do? Oh, we got to use solar power and stop driving cars and stuff. Well, obviously we should figure out how to get cars running on water, and I was talking to you about that technology. That already exists. We could desalinate the oceans very easily with some of these technologies. But global warming is an energetic phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that, as I said, is occurring throughout the solar system. It proves there's a connection between earthquakes and consciousness. It proves that there's a connection between severe weather and consciousness. And it proves that our consciousness is directly affecting the Earth. So that's a very significant piece of information for us to have, because it gives us the power back. We're no longer out there expecting that these things cannot be dealt with, that there's really nothing we can do. We do have the control. We do have the power. And it comes from pursuing the truth within ourselves. And then that truth has a radiant quality that affects the whole planet. So all we have to do is work on ourselves, work on our own inner spiritual quest, find the love within ourselves, find the ability to love ourselves, which is primarily through forgiveness. If you have forgiveness, then you can deal with all of these terrible things in your life that you haven't been willing to accept. With forgiveness comes the stoppage of the wheel of karma. You don't have to keep going through cycle after cycle of suffering anymore, because now what you're doing is breaking the cycle. And so on a collective level, all these earth changes over here are happening because we haven't gotten to this forgiveness over here. And when we master this, then these synthesize together, and we won't have earth changes anymore. That's part of what 2012 is about. The Law of One series, My Spiritual Backbone, says very clearly, there are no more earth changes after 2012. All of the scary stuff that's happening stops. So regardless of what you believe is going to happen, if you buy in the Law of One, and if you follow my work, you know how strongly I do, because there's a lot of science that backs up what was in those books. The books were channeled in 1981, and there's a lot of stuff that came out since then that validates point for point what's in those books, and it's way too long to explain right now. There's a lot of stuff on my website, divinecosmos.com, about that. It said very clearly, 2012 is an energetic transformation. It's a transformation that affects everyone on Earth. It's a transformation that effectively turns us into light beings, and that the Earth changes as we know them stop after 2012. Very fascinating. The pyramid was the master design in which the open sarcophagus in the king's chamber, you're supposed to lie in it. You have an out-of-body experience where you then face your own shadow self, projected to you as this monster that you have to wrestle with in the astral plane. And if you successfully can forgive and accept that part of yourself that appears to be evil, then you get the healing. Now this is what's happening to us as a planet. What do you think that projection of the part of ourselves that looks evil is in the planet right now? The New World Order, the Illuminati, the government. If you are angry at the New World Order, if you are angry at the Illuminati, if you hate them, and if you're out there afraid of them, they're winning. Because negative entities feed on your fear. They actually harness your energy of fear. The fear that you feel sends energy to them. What I'm here to tell you is that there is nothing to be afraid of, because they are fulfilling their purpose of acting as the projection of our shadow. We're going through this planetary initiation of the open sarcophagus. The reason why it's open is that once we're through this, there is no more death. We have reached a state of immortality, much different than where we are now. That's what the prophecies say. When someone who is profane, if you will, using a Masonic term, goes into the pyramid, like Napoleon, he had a terrible night. He tried to stay in the sarcophagus overnight. He had horrible nightmares, and he ran screaming out of the pyramid. So you have to be ready for this. That's his actual sketch of his terrible night in the pyramid that he drew. Isaac Newton, of course, was just another guy, a scientist, and he happened to see an apple fall, and everybody saw apples falling out of trees all the time. The only difference is that Newton starts saying, hey, why did the apple fall out of the tree? Is there something that made the apple fall out of the tree? It's gravity. There's a force that pulled the apple out of the tree and made it hit the ground. It doesn't just happen. There's a reason for why it happens. So this is the new Newtonian revolution. And the question is, are we looking to see the apple falling? Are we looking at the obvious truth of pyramids, Stonehenge, standing stones, temples, churches, megalithic structures built all around the world, 4,000 of them, and every single one is built on this grid? That's the same thing as Newton seeing the apple fall. That's the same thing. The only difference is that we haven't yet identified that there's a force responsible for why they built these things in these places. This brings us back to the questions of God. What you're starting to see is a provable spiritual teaching, a scientifically valid exploration of a supreme being. That's where we're going. Religion doesn't need to be there except as a way to organize your understanding of a one infinite creator. You can go into this atheistic and look at it strictly scientifically and come to the conclusion that there must be some intelligence to the universe. And that's one of the problems, is that the word intelligent design has now been irrevocably intertwined with creationist biblical teaching. And that should not happen, because many people who are proponents of intelligent design are not buying into mainstream Christian theology. But what's happened is that either you're a scientist, which means you don't believe any of this stuff, or you're a religious nutcase. But there's a middle ground, and that's the thing, is the ancients knew this. And then you have groups like the Masonic Order, which have taken all these ancient traditions, like on the back of the dollar bill, and they make it secret, but they hide it right out in front of you. They've shown you the pyramid, right? They're showing you the eye going down. Obviously, they think that's really important because it's one. They have the word one on the dollar everywhere, one God, right? It's the one God. George Washington's eye is directly in the middle of the dollar on the front. If you go and take a look, you'll see that. Because there's a little painting in the top of the U.S. Capitol dome. If you sit on your back and you look up at the top of the Capitol, there's a painting up there, a fresco, called The Apotheosis of George Washington, in which he is positioned on a rainbow, because they believe that he ascended after he was President of the United States and that he became a god, because they believe themselves to be gods where no one else is. And so what happens is, they do not want us to know this, because if we knew that the pyramid could bring us to a godlike state, then we would start building them and we'd start using them, and they don't want us to have the technology. So they flaunt it right in front of you. They put it on the dollar bill, and they build the largest building in Washington, D.C. is what? The Washington Monument, which is what? It's a big obelisk. It's the same thing as the menhir, the standing stone, intended to ripple out energy into the surrounding city. You have a question? She asked, is it true that the world elite has different DNA? This is very interesting, and somebody asked me about our new whistleblower, Dr. Pete Peterson, and wanting me to share some of his testimony. And I said this on the radio with Project Camelot. I'll repeat it. There are some technologies that have been discovered that allow you to have a certain degree of influence over people's minds. Mind control. Okay? It's scary stuff. It is primarily something that can create blunt changes. It's not anything that can beam into your head and make you do very specific things. That's a misnomer. But it is possible to make a rough change to the way that people feel using certain types of energy based on these technologies. However, Dr. Peterson's research people found that fully 15% of all the people in the world cannot be affected by mind control. Ever. Ever. Now, we got this from the highest level of the Black Ops community. They cannot be affected at all. Ever. They developed a technology to make sure that if you're not part of that 15%, that you become part of that 15% who can never be affected by mind control. The technology is very simple, and they gave it to all the world leaders and all the Illuminati politicians. and they would hide it under their shirt lapel. See, I don't have one because I'm not in there, all right? I'm just proving it right now. The technology is this little device that you put in your eye, and it has a little blinking light in it. And you turn a knob on the thing, and it makes the light blink faster and faster and faster, and you look at it. And what you're supposed to do is you keep looking at this device until the blinking frequency is so fast that you don't see the blink anymore, that you only see a clean light. Now what you want to do is get to the point that you can see it blinking faster and faster. That's the goal. You want to be able to see the blink and not have it turn into a solid light. Now, it's called a flicker frequency generator because what happens is it finds out the exact level. You turn it up just to the level where it becomes a solid color, where you no longer see blinking. And then there's a little weird circuit in there that's based on torsion fields. It's this funny little circuit, and it generates that frequency and it's beaming it into your body. It's a very, very simple circuit. There's nothing high technology about this, but what it does is it keeps your brain rate, it keeps your frequency of your brainwave activity up at the level where this frequency is flickering at a higher speed. Okay? Once your brainwave activity is up at that higher speed, you cannot be mind controlled at all. Now, any of us can reach that frequency. And the best way to reach it is, guess what? You knew what the answer was. Meditation. If you are in a positive, uplifting state of consciousness, if you are inspired and you're not negative and down but you have this positive outlook, your flicker frequency is too high to be affected by mind control. Now then the next question is, well, 15% of the people automatically don't have any susceptibility to mind control, and it turns out that yes, they do have a slightly different form of DNA than the rest of the planet. That's true. But it's not just people in the New World Order, and it's not just a master race, it's not just the white man, it's black people, it's Asian people, it's every race has part of this 15%. The thing that these guys in the government haven't discovered yet is that that little DNA marker that they found in the DNA is something that you switch on. You're not born with it. You switch it on by getting enlightened. Okay? That's why 15% of the people have it. It's the DNA marker that shows you that you have reached a level where your DNA has activated and where you no longer are susceptible to mind control. So if you are worried about this kind of stuff, if you are in fear, the answer to fear is love. Because fear is the absence of the energy of the universe. The energy of the universe will destroy poison, it will destroy disease, it will bring you bliss, it will bring you happiness, and it will bring you vitality to your physical body. It will raise your IQ, it will raise your vibration. It does these amazing, miraculous things. And the reason why you can see it in the DNA is that you switch on your DNA. We're going to look for a moment at crop circles, and I'm going to show you some patterns in the crops that actually predict this type of change happening in the world, that there's a DNA change going on. First of all, I want to make it clear that crop circles have existed for a long, long time. If you go back to 815 AD in France, back then there was no church and state separation. The church was the government. And that's got to suck. Now in this posh quarters that he's got here with all the luxurious interior decorating and lighting, he's busy scribbling away at an edict to try to further control and manipulate the masses. And the edict is called Against the Foolish Opinion of the Masses About Hail and Thunder. This is basically the 815 AD version of swamp gas, because they believed in cloud ships. Ships in the sky like boats, but they're in the clouds. From what they called Magonia, that were flattening crops into circles as a ransom to protect against bad weather. So what they felt was that these cloud ships were giving them good weather, that these cloud ships were making sure the weather was good. But hey, if you want me to give you good weather, you need to give me something. let me flatten these crops down into beautiful little circles for you. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but they were pagans and they were running around naked in the forest, so we got to kind of give them some credit where credit is due. So he had to issue a prohibition against locals taking seeds out of the crop circles because they wanted to use them in fertility rituals. Why do you think they did? Because these crop circles were totally energized. And when you built something out of them and you ran through it, man, you got a big, big charge of energy. It's amazing. So that's why he spent so much time having to defend the farmers, because the farmers were getting so angry about everybody taking out the crops from their crop circles that they actually had to complain to the government and make a government edict that says you can't do it. In the 12th century, you see reports of fairy rings, which they call the ring of daisies caused by elves dancing. I found this 1880 illustration actually showing the fairies running around in a circle, stamping down the grass. Very fascinating, because this is the crop circle. That's how they believed it was being made. And in 1678, you have this legend of the mowing devil, in which a farmer hired a mower to mow down his crops. And the mower says, I want $2,000 to mow down this crop, even though it's only going to take me, a day. And the farmer's like, $2,000? You out of your mind? I mean, I'm just making it into conventional terms, just to try to make it more accessible to us. I'd rather have the devil mow my crops down than you. And he goes to bed that night, and the whole field lights up like it's on fire. Oh boy, something's going on out there. Am I going to lose all my crops? Is it burning? Then he goes outside the next day after all this fire, or what he thought was fire, this brilliant white light, and a perfect circle had appeared in the crop, so neatly mowed that no mortal man could have done it. So this obviously scared the crap out of him. And so, of course, being in the 1600s, it's the devil. It's got to be the devil. It's got to be. And so they actually illustrated the devil going around with his little sickle and chopping the crops down. In the same period of the 1600s, Dr. Robert Plot was also looking into crop circles, among many other forms of research. He was one of the first paleontologists who was digging up dinosaur fossils and trying to make sense out of what this was. And so when he dug up a particular fossil, he thought that he was seeing the scrotum of a giant. So he is our first homoerotic paleontologist. And yes, that would be an enormous boner. This is actually the hip bone of a megalosaurus, so you can imagine how well hung this giant was. Oh my God. And what he was doing is he was drawing the crop circles that were showing up in the English countryside. And they're not just circles. Look at this. Now, this is his really, really silly hypothesis where he says, oh, well, there is a square gust of wind which drew this perfect square on the ground. Of course. That's how it works. What you're seeing is that the modern theory has really not gotten a whole lot better than this. We haven't really grown much in 400 years in mainstream science, because some of the English say that the crop circles are nothing more than an army of hedgehogs running round and round. Literally. I mean, that's one of the arguments of what was causing this to happen. He also found that the soil became much more dry and loose than ordinary, and that it had a white whore on it. I'm not even going there, so don't even... Much like moldy bread with a musty, rancid smell, but to the taste insipid, meaning it didn't taste bad. Now, that's a heck of a scientist, man. You can imagine. That's brave. He's a real trooper. Here's what's fascinating. Dr. Gil Levengood documented exactly the same thing in the 1990s, because you have a technology that is zapping the water out of the soil, which makes the soil get super dehydrated, which is why it gets so dry and crumbly, right? All the moisture is gone. Because the technology is pulling the water out of the soil to make sure that the crops don't do what? Catch on fire. That's why some of the other research that's been done has shown that there are natural underground water aquifers where the crop circles are being formed, and when a crop circle comes down, all the water under the ground goes away. Why? Because the water is being pulled out with an advanced technology to stop the crop from burning up. That's what's going on. Now, in the late 1940s, William Cyril Williams actually saw a whirlwind touch the ground and form a circle. In only a couple seconds, the wheat fell down and produced a sharp-edged circle 3 to 4 meters in diameter. That's in the late 1940s. So here we have a guy who's seeing what he thinks of as a whirlwind, meaning that he's seeing objects spinning around, and this perfect circle shows up in the ground. That's the 1940s. 1972, in Warminster, suddenly I heard a noise. It seemed that something pushed down the wheat. Check out the next sentence and really pay attention to that. What does it say? That night the air was completely still. No wind. This is not a wind phenomenon. And here's an eyewitness. We send people to prison for life. We have executed people on eyewitness testimony. And here you have an eyewitness standing in a field and watching a crop circle being formed right in front of his eyes, unfolding like a lady's fan, forced down in a clockwise direction with a high-pitched hum, and there was no wind. He just literally watched the crops just go, and boom, there's a crop circle, just right in front of him. You can imagine how amazing that must have been to see. Just amazing. So in the early days of the 1970s, you had single circles. The next stage was you got 4 points around the circles. That became very common for a while. Then you started to see a lot of this kind of stuff. And for a while, people didn't know what that was. But then we looked back into ancient iconography, and we found that it was a symbol of the pregnant mother goddess. What do you think they're telling us by giving it to us in the earth, in crops from the earth? Could it be that the earth itself is pregnant, that the mother earth is giving birth to a new age, that's what this 2012 thing is about again? It's the same people that built the pyramids and gave us the year 2012 in the pyramid and gave it to us in the Mayan calendar. If you believe that the Mayan calendar was built not by the Mayans, but by the people who were helping the Mayans? Could it be that they would now be coming back for the last 1,200 years since 815 AD, making crop circles, and then telling us, look at 2012. But did they tell us, look at 2012? And the answer is yes. We're going to get to that in a second. Check this out. In case you didn't think that it was the goddess, they came back a couple years ago and said, nope, it's the goddess. There she is. Here you see 3 pregnant goddesses. 1, 2, 3. And actually, that could be one over there, too. This came through in 1990. It was on the cover of the Led Zeppelin box set, which I got for Christmas in 1990. I had no idea that that was real. I thought it was just something they'd made out of a carpet or something. I had no idea it was actually crops. 1991, you've seen me talk a great deal about this in my other articles, the Barbary Castle Formation, which appears to be saying first dimension, second dimension, third dimension, fourth dimension, that this is a dimensional shift. Because first you have just the point in the void, then you have the rotation in 2 dimensions, where it starts to fan out, and then it becomes 3-dimensional. If you connect these lines together, you have what looks like a pyramid. And then you go into the tetrahedron inside the sphere, and that's the 4th dimension right there. Next you have the Mandelbrot set. A group of scientists were sitting around studying crop circles and said, wouldn't it be amazing if we saw a Mandelbrot set show up in the crops? And the next day, that's what happened. They're listening. 1996, around Stonehenge, right in front of Stonehenge, truck driver is going by, and he drives past this area of the countryside that's flipped up like this, and he doesn't see anything. And 15 minutes later, the farmer found this formation in his crops. Now, each of the distance between these tram lines is about 90 feet, so this is an enormous, enormous size object that was formed in 15 minutes in the crops, on the ground. Surveyors were called in, and it was asked of them how long would it take to build this with any type of normal process, and they said 3 days minimum, 15 minutes. And then again, you go back to 815 AD, and what did the pagans in France say was causing crop circles to form? Cloud ships from Magonia. Do you think maybe they saw the cloud ships? No, why would they actually name them cloud ships if they hadn't seen them? Of course they saw cloud ships. So that's what I'm trying to tell you here. It's like, look, these guys have been coming here for 1,200 years in ships, and they're building crop circles for us. So what's the message? What's the point? Well, check this one out. I mean, look at how big that sucker is. 90 feet between each of these lines. That's enormous. And it's just beautiful. That's my favorite one of all because there's so much geometry inside, like the cat's cradle, as you can see here. It's amazing. Now this was obvious illustration of the Koch snowflake, which is one of the fractals. And then scientists started saying, you know, the skeptics started saying, oh, no, that's not a Koch snowflake. It can't be. So Circle Maker said, okay, fine, you don't believe us. You don't believe it's a Koch snowflake? We'll build you another one. We'll put a snowflake in it for you. That'll show you. Now we know what we're talking about here. So, now that is obviously an army of hedgehogs running round and round caused that to form. This last formation is my favorite one of all because to suggest that anybody could have hoaxed that mandala with anything they could do on the ground, it's crazy to think that that could have been done by people with any type of land equipment. I mean, these are crops. We're talking about stalks of wheat. And how in the world do you get it that precise? There isn't one mistake. If you look at it and you really study the flow pattern, there's no mistakes in that sucker. It is perfect. How the heck could that have been done? How the heck could it have been done in 815 AD? Because it's ETs, because it's not from us, obviously. Now, are these circles just showing us pretty colors and pretty patterns, or are they actually giving us a message? The answer is yes. The message is genetic change, evolution. Look at this. 1991, you see chromosomes, but more importantly, you see chromosomes breaking. That's what happens right before the cell divides. The cell division is what creates new life. Here, in 1996, you see a very clear DNA spiral in the crop formation. Then in 1999, you see the same type of curve in this formation, and it's a single sine wave, and then you come back less than a month later, and now it's fanned out into these groups of three. What you see here is the DNA spiral at the top, clearly shown with the 12 circles and the 2 lines going through it. Then you have a triangular shape in which you get sine waves. But then in the third shape, which is only a month later, you're seeing 3 strands. Not just the sine wave, but now there's 3 limbs to each of these geometries, suggesting that there's something changing in the DNA itself related to this geometric vibration, this harmonic geometry. This is another very obvious description of a DNA molecule because what you're seeing is the twisting double helix. And again, remember, these have been showing up since the 815 AD, 800s in the AD era. So this is not new, and it's clearly telling us, look at our DNA. Now, this actually may be perhaps the most significant crop circle ever, believe it or not, because you're getting all these complex metaphors in one shape. In the center, you have what appears to be the Milky Way galaxy. This would be the center of the Milky Way. This is the arms of the Milky Way. But then, doesn't this 2 sine wave pattern look familiar? Didn't you just see that right here? Okay? But look at this. Now you got DNA coming out of what? The center of the galaxy. And even more importantly, this part in the middle is being highlighted, and that's a yod, which is a Hebrew symbol that indicates spiritual energy, he knows, coming into manifestation. We have a man named Omer who's here from Tel Aviv in Israel. Let's give it a hand for Omer. And he starts nodding his head because he says, oh yeah, that's the yod. It's a classic Hebrew symbol, and they put it right in there. So it shows spiritual energy manifesting. Now here comes the definitive 2012 formation that actually flags the era right around that time. What you're seeing here is quite literally a planetary alignment of exactly how the planets look in 2012. The exact day being December 21st, 2012. Now, pay special attention to the diameter of what is indicated to be the sun here. That's very important. Now, initially you look at the inner planets, and what you see is that Venus, Mercury, Earth, they're all aligned with, for some reason they messed up and looked at December 23rd, but the planets don't move fast enough for this to make too much difference. It is the 21st, okay? Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and then when you go out, you see Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Pluto's the only one that's off by a little bit, and my contention is that that's because, first of all, Pluto is not actually a planet, and second of all, if they'd put it any closer to this line, it would have broken the line and it wouldn't have looked right. So we're told, basically, you don't need to worry about this because Pluto moves so slowly, there's no other time that could be indicated by this alignment except December 21st, 2012. Now, the farmer gets all pissed off and decides that he's going to drive lines through the crop circle to try to ruin the circle. The circle maker says, oh, you don't like it? Cool. Well, I'll come back and I'll draw twice as much. But check out what else he did. Not only did he draw all these little glyphs over here that look like descriptions of various ETs in ET races, but look at the width of the sun now. The sun is now going all the way out to Venus. And so this is very much indicating some sort of massive change that's going to happen in 2012 on December 21st that's going to do what? Something to the whole way that the sun works, the solar system. It's a solar system change. The December 21st, 2012 planetary alignment was messed up by the farmer. The circle makers came back, and when they came back, they tagged it like graffiti. Yeah, baby, that's my fit right there. All right? Where'd that must be Curtis. I don't know how he got in here. And then, not only did Curtis tag it for us, but then we got the sun that suddenly widened. And as many people have noticed, there's an S shape. You see the S in there? So we have some very interesting stuff going on here. And it says that the solar system is going to transform. Well, that's pretty cool. How did we get all that in one crop circle? That's amazing.